Well, good afternoon, everyone. Really appreciate folks joining us. Today, we're going to be doing, it's basically the third kind of get together that we've had on the draft MiEJScreen. And this session is the first one we're going to be doing today. We're actually doing another one this afternoon or this evening as well. But this is an information and comment session for the draft tool. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're going to be doing the comments in just a second, but I want to go through just a couple housekeeping things before we really get started here. So the first thing I want to do is just let you know who is all here. So I'm Jennifer Dixon, and I'm the Air Quality Liaison in EGLE's Environmental Support Division. And then I also have Regina Strong. She's the head of our Environmental Justice Office of Environmental Justice Public Advocate. And I apologize, I can't talk very well today. And then we've got Katie Lambeth, and she is the Environmental Justice and Tribal Liaison. And then John Esch is a geologist in our Oil, Gas, and Minerals Division. And I don't want to say that he's necessarily the brainchild behind the MiEJScreen tool, but he's done a lot of the creation of it, and he's going to walk you through kind of how to use it a little bit. So today we're going to be shortening up our presentation on the tool itself, just to kind of let folks know, if you haven't been able to join us in the past, maybe get you a little bit more familiar on how it works and what it is. And then we're going to get right into some of the other stuff. So we're going to go a little bit over the background information. We want to talk a little bit about the tool and how the scoring works and things like that, just to refresh people's minds on that. Or maybe, like I said, if this is the first time you're hearing about it. Like I said, John's going to walk us through a short demonstration of the tool, kind of give you some highlights of the really neat things that it does. We're going to get to, or we're calling this a question, answer, and comment session. And so this is the part I really wanted to talk about with folks, just to lay the groundwork of this before we get started. So when we were talking earlier this week, obviously, inclusion is really, really important to the team at EGLE, and the MiEJScreening tool is a really important part of that inclusivity. And so what we thought we would do is, instead of basically kind of chunking it up like a question and answer and then starting an official comment period, we're going to include all the questions, all the answers, and then any just comments you want to give on the record for the whole record itself. So once the tool comment period closes on May 16th, staff that you see here with us today are going to be going through all those question and answers and comments and everything that we received today through the voicemail, through the email, verbally, whatever the case may be, and compiling those and kind of doing a report out, and obviously some potential changes to the draft tool before it's officially issued. So just to kind of let you know that if you have questions, we're going to include those in the comment, the public comment, the official record. If you have just comments that you want to give on the tool, we're going to include those too. So just to let you know, that's going to be a little bit broader definition of maybe what you're typically used to, giving public comment on like permitting decisions and things like that. And feel free to ask me questions on that as well. So once we get to the end of that, so that's going to be maybe like 5 minutes to the end of our time today, like 2:25 or something, if we get that far. I'm going to just quickly talk to you guys again about how you can submit comments until May 16th, where you can go to get more information, and then how to get a hold of us. So a couple other quick housekeeping things just to remind folks is that you will be muted during this meeting, and we are recording this. So we've recorded the first 2 sessions on March 29th, if you're interested in those, and those are posted on the michigan.gov/environmental justice webpage. But you will have an opportunity to verbalize questions and comments. So when we get to that portion, we'll just have you raise your hand, and I'll tell you how to do that in a second, and then I'll unmute you so that you can speak. So speaking of questions and answers and comments, you're just going to want to use that Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. So like I said, if you type in a question or you type in a comment, all that will become part of the official record today. If you verbalize a question or comment, that will become part of the record today. So just use that Q&A box on the bottom of your screen. If you are joining us online, you can use the raise hand icon if you'd like to verbalize your thoughts. And if you're calling in, you're just going to want to click #2 on your phone there. So I wanted to get through that really quickly so I can pass it over to Regina Strong. So Katie, if you want to go ahead and share your screen, and then we'll have Regina take it over. And that looks great over here.
So good afternoon, and thanks, Jennifer. I'm Regina Strong. I'm the Environmental Justice Public Advocate. So I wanted to just kind of start out talking a little bit about our office, the Office of the Environmental Justice Public Advocate. We were created by executive order of Governor Whitmer in early 2019 to have a space and a place to really focus on both handling concerns around environmental justice and complaints as they came in, and also moving us forward in addressing environmental injustices and issues that impact communities, considered environmental justice communities. And so one of the other things in that executive order was the creation of an interagency environmental justice response team. And that team is compiled of representation from several state departments, started meeting in the summer of 2019 and has met ever since. And in addition to that, we also created an advisory council, the Michigan Advisory Council on Environmental Justice, which also started meeting in the beginning of 2020, had one in-person meeting right before the pandemic took hold. And then we've met virtually ever since. So this is a little bit about just the structure of our environmental justice work. Our office is connected directly and sits in the executive office of the Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, or EGLE, and also has a direct line to the governor's office as a type 1 agency, which is how we were included in the executive order. We have the interagency response team that I mentioned, which has 4 work groups: communication and outreach, planning and policy, training, research and data. The research and data work group is where the development of the screening tool began. And I didn't mention that the advisory council also connects. So here's a picture of what I affectionately call the MiEJ. It is a very intentional mix of folks, including frontline community organizations, environmental organization, tribal representation, local government, academia. If you take a look, and labor, if you take a look at this particular picture, there are also heads of departments who are part of the interagency response team. And this was the first and only, a picture of the first and only in-person meeting that the MiEJ was able to have prior to the pandemic. And so since that time, we've been working through a lot of things. And one of the things that both the MiEJ and the response team weighed in on is how we as Michigan would define environmental justice. So this definition is based on the EPA's definition, and we kind of added more to it to really make it fit how we work in Michigan and how we want it to reflect on our work in environmental justice. So I'll take a quick moment to read this, but environmental justice is the equitable treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, ability, or income, and is critical to the development and application of laws, regulations, and policies that affect the environment, as well as the places people live, work, play, worship, and learn. So when we talk about equitable treatment, we really mean that no group of people bears a disproportionate share of the negative consequences resulting from governmental, industrial, or commercial operations and policies, that all people benefit from the application of our laws and regulations, and that we work toward eliminating barriers such as poverty and lack of access, as well as toward repairing systemic injustices. And when we talk about meaningful involvement, we really want to make sure that people have an opportunity to participate in decisions that affect their environment and or health, that decision makers seek out and facilitate involvement of those potentially affected, and that people's concerns are considered in decision-making processes, as well as the opportunity for people to influence state agency decisions. So a little background on the development of the MiEJScreen. You know, over the years, environmental justice advocates have called for a tool or a way to really look at all of the factors that communities face. And in 2018, the Environmental Justice Working Group that had been convened a year earlier by the previous administration came out with 33 recommendations. Among those recommendations was the recommendation to create some type of screening tool for the state of Michigan to be able to do exactly what advocates had called for many years. In addition to that, in 2019, a group of University of Michigan graduate students under the direction of Dr. Paul Mohai took a look at what a Michigan screening tool could potentially look like if it was developed. And so as part of that project, they developed a tool to be used potentially for the same purpose. And so in the development of the MiEJScreen, we really looked at what are the best sources of information, how do we pull things together? And so all of those, items that I just mentioned played into that. And this was identified very early on as a priority for the Office of the Environmental Justice Public Advocate, as well as the response team. So over the last 2 years, we've worked on developing the tool. And we looked at existing tools, other methodology. We talked to quite a few stakeholders over time. And we also looked at the different ways we could collaborate and get information from various state departments. So the purpose of the tool is to have something that is Michigan specific. You may have heard that EPA has a screening tool. There are other screening tools out there, but this really includes very Michigan specific information, as well as a way to assess all the cumulative factors, both environmental factors, socioeconomic health factors that impact communities, and really to help inform allocation of resources, policy decisions, address community-specific issues and concerns, and then really something that could be used and provide a common platform of information for multiple stakeholders, whether you are, a person who lives in a community, an organization, business and industry, government at all levels, local, state, and federal. Really a tool that helps move us forward, looking at the same set of information. So I'm going to hand things off to Katie Lambeth, who's going to talk a little bit about methodology and lead us into our demonstration.
Great, thank you, Regina. I'm Katie Lambeth. I'm EGLE's Environmental Justice and Tribal Liaison, and I'm going to be talking about the methodology, scoring, and the indicators used in MiEJScreen. So I apologize in advance if some of this is a little technical. If you want more in-depth information on any of this information, please refer to our draft MiEJScreen technical report. The methodology used for MiEJScreen is based on California's EnviroScreen, which is a screening tool that evaluates the burden of pollution from multiple sources while accounting for potential vulnerability to the adverse effects of pollution. So there are two sides to the equation, the pollution burden and the vulnerability. Similar to EnviroScreen, MiEJScreen is based on potential exposures to pollutants, environmental conditions, socioeconomic factors, and the prevalence of certain health conditions to produce scores for every census tract in the state. In the next slide, I'll talk about what a census tract is and why we chose to use census tracts. The scores are mapped so that different communities can be compared. So an area with a high score is one that experiences more impacts than areas with low scores. We use percentile ranking in order to compare scores for each census tract, which I'll talk more about in a couple slides. MiEJScreen ranks communities based on data that are available from state and federal sources. And the indicators selected were based on the availability of national or statewide data that could be incorporated into the tool and at the appropriate geographic scale. So here we're using census tracts. Therefore, we were limited in the data that we could include in the tool, and we recognize that MiEJScreen doesn't include every environmental or health impact communities are facing. So census tracts are small, relatively permanent subdivisions of a county designated by the United States Census Bureau. Census tract boundaries are determined with the goal of being maintained over a long time so that statistical comparisons can be made. So therefore, data is often readily available at this geographic scale. Census tracts range in size, but have an average population of 4,000 people. Census tracts are used to represent the locations of communities across Michigan. And in Michigan, there's 2,767 census tracts. And as you can see in this image, because census tracts are population-based, the areas range in size. So as I mentioned previously, the MiEJScreen overall score for each census tract is given a percentile rank based on how the overall score for that census tract compares to others in the state. So this image shows how the overall score is displayed on the map. Each of these color bins represents 10% of census tracts, with the 90th to 100th percentiles being the highest scores and the 0 to 10th percentiles being the lowest. As I mentioned previously, Michigan has 2,767 census tracts. So each color bin represents approximately 276 tracts. So as an example, as you can see in this highlighted census tract, it has an overall score that falls within the 25th percentile, which represented on the map in the blue shaded color bin for the 20th to 30th percentile. When comparing the census tract to the rest of the state, 75% of census tracts in Michigan have a higher score, while 24% have a lower score. So now I'm going to talk about how the MiEJScreen overall score is calculated. The overall score is made up of two subscores: environmental conditions and population characteristics. These two subscores are further divided into 4 categories. There's 2 categories representing environmental conditions, that is environmental exposures and environmental effects, and 2 categories representing population characteristics, that is sensitive populations and socioeconomic factors. Each of the categories has a set of indicators, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a few slides. An indicator is a measure of either environmental conditions representing pollution burden or health or vulnerability factors for population characteristics. The individual indicators are scored for each census tract by its raw value, then assigned percentiles based on rank order. The percentile scores are averaged for each of the 4 categories. And then to generate subscores, the average percentile scores for the respective categories were added together and averaged. Please note that the environmental effect indicators were weighed half the environmental exposure indicators because they only represent potential exposure. The overall MiEJScreen score is calculated by multiplying the subscores. And then census tracts are ordered from highest to lowest based on their overall score. And a percentile for the overall score is then calculated from those ordered values. And as I showed you in the previous slide, the tool maps the cumulative overall MiEJ score for every census tract and percentile rank, but the user can also see the subscores, the category scores, and each of the 26 individual indicators scores. I'm not going to go super in depth into each of the indicators. If you want more information on this, again, you can either watch our previous recording of our session, check out the website, or look at the draft technical report. The environmental exposure indicators are based on measurements of different types of pollution that people may come into contact with. Most of these are air quality related issues, and the majority of these indicators came directly from EPA's EGLE. Environmental effect indicators generally show proximity to known or potential contamination sites. Many of these indicators are sites regulated by EGLE, as well as information from EPA's EGLE. Sensitive population indicators refer to human populations that experience increased vulnerability to environmental health risk factors such as pollution. And pollution is not only a likely contributor to the generation of such conditions, but also has been found to worsen them. All of the data for indicators in this category was prepared by the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, except for the life expectancy indicator, which is a national data set. Socioeconomic factor indicators are conditions that make people more sensitive to pollution's effects. The susceptibility of communities of color and low-income populations to various environmental conditions have been reaffirmed many times through research. All of these indicators come from the United States Census Bureau's American Community Survey 5-year estimate from 2015 to 2019. The tool also has additional layers that help put the MiEJScreen layers into context. This isn't an entire list of the context layers, but it gives you an idea of the type of information that's included. The context layers with an asterisk are used in calculating some of the environmental effect indicators. For example, the sites of environmental contamination, part 201, were used to calculate the proximity to cleanup sites indicator. We also have additional environmental justice layers, such as the homeowner's loan corporation, neighborhood redlining grade maps. This information is important for understanding how past policies and practices have contributed to current situation. These maps, created during the Great Depression, developed a neighborhood ranking system known today as redlining that banks use to determine eligibility for mortgages. This practice formalized racial housing discrimination, as communities of color were often deemed to be hazardous or declining, and in areas where banks refused to offer loans. So this not only produced segregation based on race in American cities, but also contributed to the racial wealth gap. We also have some climate indicators, including urban heat islands and percent tree canopy, as well as other EJ layers such as food deserts and non-attainment areas. We also included several geographic features such as tribal lands and counties, as well as the location of schools and hospitals. So if you're interested in additional information on how to use the tool and more detailed information about the methodology and the indicators used in the tool, please refer to the supporting documents. The fact sheet is a short document that provides an overview of MiEJScreen. The user guide provides information on how to use the tool and its various functions. And the draft technical report details the development of the tool, including the purposes and intended uses, limitations of the tool, as well as the data and methods used to develop the tool. So as Jennifer mentioned, we are accepting comments on the draft tool through May 16th, 2022. There's a variety of ways that you can submit comments. And again, we'll pull this up later at the end of the presentation as well. But you can submit comments by mail, through our email box, by voicemail, or today at this session. You can go to the MiEJScreen landing page to find lots more information, including the recordings of the informational webinar and screening tool demonstration, which kind of goes a little bit more in depth than we did today, that was conducted on March 29th. We are also holding an additional office hour on May 2nd. This gives people the opportunity to talk about the tool and how to use it. And then all of our supporting documents. So the easiest way to get there is just to go to michigan.gov/environmental-justice. And then you can get to the MiEJScreen landing page from there. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to John Esch to introduce himself and to begin the tool demonstration.
Hi, my name is John Esch. I'll give you a short demonstration of the tool. I'm just going to wave and say hi, turn off my video. I have a slow internet connection. So can you guys see my screen?
Yep, that looks good, John. Thanks.
Okay. So as Katie said, the easiest way to get there is through the Office of Environmental Justice Advocate. Another good way is just go to Google or your favorite browser and type in MiEJScreen. So here is the main Office of Environmental Justice Advocate. If you go down here to the screening tool, it'll take you to this page. So this is the main MiEJScreen page. From here, you can go to the app itself or an executive summary, which I'll show you in just a minute. You can also see the scoring matrix, the fact sheet, technical report, and the user's guide. More information on how to provide comments, but also more information on the model and the indicators. So each one of these you can view the indicators. So let's start out by showing you the executive summary. So this is a simplified single layer app, just the overall score. And so if you're just looking at the overall score, this might be all you need. And so let me just click on a rural tract here in Clare County. This census tract scores in the 6th percentile. And just for a quick comparison, the census tract scores in 62nd percentile. There's more information here on the subscores in the categories. We also have a shows all 4 components or categories on the graphic scale. You can also get some demographic information as far as each census tracts, what the demography looks like. So again, this is just the simplified version. You can search by an address, pan and zoom. There's multiple ways you can change the background map in print. And this will probably meet many people's needs. You can also go to the full version. So this is the full version. Don't let it intimidate you, and you can't break it. So this has all the 2 subscores. For instance, here's the environmental conditions. Here's the population characteristics, but also has the 4 categories. For instance, here's the exposure category, and also the environmental effects category. And one example of the environmental effects category could be cleanup sites. If we come down further, this is the socioeconomic category. So again, all of these 26 indicators in categories and subscores, you can pan and zoom. For instance, if we zoom in to the Grand Rapids area, again, we can turn on any one of these pop-ups to get additional information. So sometimes if you're in here navigating, turning layers on and off, you might maybe get lost. You can always just do a refresh. All it does is it starts the app from scratch. It'll also bring up a splash screen. Sorry for the delay. I've kind of a slow internet connection here at home. So the splash screen gives you some additional information on the app, and also how to communicate with the EJ team. So by default, again, here's the splash screen. Here's the scoring matrix. Some of these are called widgets or icons or tools. So any of these tools, they toggle on and off. For instance, we have the legend turned on by default, but you may be panning and zooming in and inadvertently turn it off. This is a bookmark widget, so you can quickly zoom in to the large cities in the state. This is a measure tool, allows you to quickly measure a distance or an area or get latitude, longitude. This widget here is a screening widget. We'll get to that in a second. I'll show you just a really brief example or report widget. We also have a side-by-side widget. Let me just show you that briefly. So with this widget, any of the layers that we have either in the main environmental justice layer list or the context layers, you can see side by side. So for instance, here's the overall score. And here's the percent tree canopy, which is kind of a proxy for potential for concerns for climate change. So as we zoom in any part of the state, the maps are in sync. Again, each one of these layers has its own pop-up. You obviously see the pop-up for the overall score. So on these, Katie mentioned the context layers. So again, these are additional layers to help put the main EJ information in context. So for instance, the redlining maps. If we turn off the overall score, you click on any of these redline maps, and the additional information, you can see the original maps from the 30s. You can also see the actual forms from the 30s also. Other important context layers. We have the Justice 40 data here for Michigan, which is in a draft fashion. We also have information on water affordability, and many other context layers. Again, we also have geographic layers. So for instance, here's the tribal layers. Let's go back to the overall score. A really useful tool is this filter widget. So for instance, into these EJ indicators, we can filter above a certain criteria. So let's look at the overall score above the 60th percentile. Let me turn off the redlining map. So this is just a really nice way to drill down to see which indicators are high in certain areas. Let me turn off the filter. This is a base map gallery, so it allows us to go in and turn layers on and off. See the base map. For instance, here's the aerial photo, topographic, street map, or the default grayscale. This is a glossary, so we have many indicators, many terms that people may not be familiar with. So this glossary gives you a description of each one of the indicators, but also some of the context layers and also connections to the source for some of this data. You can also print a map. So for instance, you could turn a number of layers on and then click the print icon. And a nice map comes up. You can give it a label. This tool, this allows you to add additional data. So for instance, if you have your own data, or if you have data from, say you work for a county or a city, you want to show parcels or some other information, you can add your own information. So I'm showing you an example really briefly. We're going to add some external data. And these are the formats you can add. So this layer is energy burden. So these are all the parcels where people are paying on average over 5% of their income on energy. You can also add map services. If you know an existing URL, there's many map services out there. This widget allows you to share a map either through social media or send an email to a colleague. They'll show you a link to the app. This just gives the About widget. It's very similar to a splash screen. Gives you more information on how to use the tool, but also links to the main web page, the fact sheet, technical report, and user's guide. This how-to tool or widget gives you a description on how to use each one of these tools. And that's very similar to our user's guide. So if you want more detailed information, you can use the user's guide. I know there was a really brief overview of the highlights of the MiEJScreen tool. I'll turn it back to Katie and Regina for questions.
All right, well, John, you might want to leave your screen up just because I think we're going to have some questions on functionality for sure. So we do have a couple questions in the chat already. So, and Katie, I don't know if you want to handle this one or if you want to pass it to John, but the question was, in addition to the percentiles that we show, is there a way to see the absolute values so it's possible to tell how wide the gap is in between the two different things?
Yeah, we don't have the absolute values for all of the indicators, but for instance, if you kind of drill down on each of the indicators, some of them do have that information in the pop-up. So John, I don't know if you want to show the life expectancy one, because I know that's one where the absolute value is included.
Yeah. So if we scroll down here.
And I
So
think the next question we have in the box too, we can answer through showing on the map as well.
Yeah, so John, you got to reshare your screen so we can see it. And then just to remind people while John's pulling that up, if you have questions that you want to type into the question box, or if you want to make a question, I'm sorry, ask a question or make a comment, feel free to raise your hand using that raise hand icon or using #2 on your phone.
So this is the life expectancy indicator. In this, we need to explain this a little bit, because as in all these indicators, the higher the number, the darker the red, the higher the burden. In this case, all this data isn't showing in percentile, but if I click on one of these census tracts, the census tract is in the 94th percentile compared to all the other census tracts in the state, but the actual raw value for the census tract is 71 years life expectancy. If I clicked on, say, one of these more rural census tracts, this life expectancy percentiles is 8th percentile. Life expectancy here is 83 years. So this is an example where we are showing some of the raw data behind some of these indicators.
Do you want John to also show how the overall EJ score ranks?
Yeah, so there's a question about how the overall score ranks from worst to better. So as we showed before, the higher scores, so those communities that have higher vulnerability and higher burden are indicated by the darker red, and then the darker blue colors are those with the lower scores. So hopefully that answered that question.
Yeah, I think so. And just so folks know, that was the last question that I have. So like I said, no pressure, but if you have other questions or you want to raise your hand, please do so. I know we kind of truncated some of the functionality things that you were going to show, John, just because we wanted to make sure we're leaving a lot of time for question and stuff like that. So I do have a comment, and I'm going to go ahead and read that too. But while I'm reading that comment, if you want to think about, is there anything else that maybe we've gotten some comments on before, or things that people are asking a lot of questions about that you want to make sure you show, maybe we can do that in just a second here. So this comment says the MiEJScreen seems to do a good job honing in on and characterizing / scoring urban environmental justice hotspots. However, I'm concerned the EJ tool will not capture smaller islands of environmental injustice in rural areas. So it's a really good point, particularly locations adversely impacted by concentrated animal feeding operations or CAFOs. Harmful air emissions from CAFOs are exempt from monitoring and reporting. CAFOs are a known source of PM 2.5 and other air pollutants harmful to human health and the environment, and CAFO waste animal manure is exempt from the RCRA agriculture contributes substantially to nitrate contamination of groundwater, serving most rural Michiganders, yet their drinking water is not protected from the Safe Drinking Water Act. So that's a really nice comment. I don't know, John, is there anything that we're looking at that would be included in MiEJScreen that would relate it all to CAFOs or proximity to CAFOs or things like that?
Well, maybe if I can try to answer the first part of the question first.
Sure.
So they're talking about rural versus urban areas. So for one of the things we did is, if you look at the overall score, that's, if we look at the, for instance, the sub-score for the environmental conditions or population characteristics. So the population characteristics shows a very different picture of parts of northern Michigan to look very different for population characteristics versus the environmental conditions. And a good example of that is say the age indicator. The age indicator, the highest percentiles appear to be up in North Michigan, Upper Peninsula Michigan. So that helps capture some of that rural urban issue, but also another good example would be educational attainment. You can see, some of the higher indicators are for educational attainment are actually up in North Michigan. But also, in an attempt to maybe answer that question is, we took all the 26 indicators, and what we did was we took all the ones that had were above the 75th percentile, and then we sum them. And so hopefully that's clear. So, so for instance, you might have some rural agricultural or maybe maybe state land or national forest areas, upper peninsula Michigan, that may have scored high in one or two indicators. And so hopefully this helps capture that. So any of these 26 indicators that are above the 75th percentile, they were summed, and this is that map. So zoom into North Michigan. So for instance, this tract here in Northeast Roscommon County, this has 76, I'm sorry, this has 6 census tracts that are above the 75th percentile. This might not score very high in the overall score. Let's turn that indicator off. So its overall score is only a 5th percentile, but there's 6 indicators that are above the 75th percentile. So hopefully that helps capture some of the more rural concerns.
I think it does. And it's one of those interesting things where we had gotten this question in some of the earlier sessions, is exactly that. How does it account for that? You know, some of the scoring looks at some of those indicators, and then some looks at the other, and how does that balance out? And I think that's a really kind of a good way to show it. So if you have other questions on that, that was a really good, really nice question slash comment, I guess. There's another one that I wanted you to talk about here that I think you might have some good insight on, John. So the question was, are there current or potential capabilities for MiEJScreen to account for disproportionate exposure and or decreased means to deal with natural hazards like radon, flood zones, arsenic? So I know that you have some experience with some of those, being a geologist, but I thought you might want to chime in on that.
So we don't have any layers for radon or flood zones, but that was brought up before in a couple of other meetings. So maybe what we could do is, as far as the 100-year floodplain, we could add that as additional context layers. Those are not part of the 26 indicators or the overall score, but it'd be really easy for us to add that as a context layer. And given a couple minutes, I could find our national flood hazard layer and add it as you saw before. I get you an example. I can add data, and so we can add that as an example, maybe during one of the breaks. As far as other natural hazards, clearly there aren't a lot of earthquakes in Michigan, and there aren't any volcanoes, so that's pretty rare. But maybe I could try to go back to an earlier question about the CAFOs.
Yeah, sure.
If that would help. So EGLE has an amazing open data website. EGLE's done a really good job the last year or 2 years of actually being really transparent. So if you type EGLE GIS or EGLE Maps and Data, it'll come to this webpage. And it shows links to all of our apps. If you go down to the bottom, you can also search for data. So I'm going to search for CAFOs. So we have a layer of the permitted CAFOs. So I'm clicking on this. Are you guys seeing my screen still?
Yep, we still see it, John.
So you can either filter this data. I'm just going to download this entire data set. Sorry. So what this did was this downloaded a shape file of this information. So I'm going to take this shape file and go to the add layer button, click on file, and I'm just going to drag this onto here. So here's all those CAFOs that were in our open data website on top of our MiEJScreen.
John, maybe while we're on this open data, discussion, there was another question if there's a way to download the data in non-visual format. So on our website, we do have a link to where you can get to the open data portal to download the data behind the tool.
Oh, yeah. Yes. So if I go back here, on our main open data website, there's a spotlight. You can click on this and download this draft data and use that use on your own computers and your own GIS software.
Jennifer, do you want me to read this other question in here?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I thought John was going to show a little bit more about the CAFOs, so I was kind of waiting. So I
Okay.
apologize for that. It was me just like sitting here listening, waiting for the, the learning. That's what I do. No, this was another really good, it was more of a comment / question. So I'm just going to read a little bit from it. And it says, just curious, was there any consideration on including vulnerability to projected climate change stressors like flooding? We talked about that a little bit, extreme heat events, etc., in the environmental scoring piece. These vulnerabilities have been shown to intersect and compound with other EJ related vulnerabilities that we've shown. So I know we do have the heat island. So I didn't know if you wanted to show some of that. But that's a
Sure.
really good comment.
Yeah, we have
So-
like 3 climate related indicators, don't we, John? They're not included in the score itself, but I mean, moving forward, I think, if we were willing to partner with folks in terms of figuring out how that would make sense if we did want to include it in the scoring itself. But right now we do have that information included in our context layers.
To see those, let me turn off the overall score. And also quickly show you side by side, just a second here. So we've got this urban heat islands layer. So this is a, let's zoom in to Southeast Lower Michigan. So this is the daytime temperature difference between urban and rural in degrees. So for instance, you can see, and this is daytime. So during the day, the urban parts of Detroit are 7 degrees Celsius warmer than say Lapeer County or say St. Clair County. So this is a very, very useful data set of urban heat islands. But another one that we have, our percent tree canopy. So you can see obviously in the urban industrial areas, there's very little percent tree canopy. Another layer we have is impervious surfaces. So in some ways, impervious surfaces kind of goes hand in hand with percent tree canopy, but also it also kind of relates with the urban heat islands also. Those same things you can see we showed before, again on the side-by-side viewer, we showed earlier the percent tree canopy. Let's just change this to impervious surfaces. Let's zoom into the Grand Rapids area. So here's the overall score. Just for kicks, let's change this from the overall score to environmental subscore. And let's change this to percent tree canopy.
So I know it doesn't look like we have any more questions in the box, but are there folks that want to provide any comments? Oh, we might just have one that came up.
It was just a response from before.
Okay.
So nope, I appreciate that. I know it feels like we're not trying to pressure everybody to make comments, but I think definitely the conversations that we've been having with people that have joined us in some of our sessions have been really, really helpful and informative. And it seems like it's one of those things where even though I have heard John and Katie and Regina talk about this over the last year or so numerous times, I still feel like I'm learning every single time. So I'm sitting here formulating questions. I'm trying not to ask them to John for sure. And he makes it look very easy to go through the tool. But if you haven't had time to poke around in it, you should definitely try to find some time to do that, because it is really interesting, the things that you can find. And I appreciate personally the side-by-sides to see like, how do these certain areas reflect off of each other. And grew up in Grand Rapids, so like it's interesting to just kind of see the changes in things and how these different layers are reflected in the tool itself. So like I said, no pressure, but if folks do have questions, John, you talked about downloading the data in a non-visual format, but you didn't really show it. So we do have some time if you feel like that's something that would be pertinent in that the open data portal. We also could give the address for the open data portal. That might be interesting for folks too. And I'll put it in the chat, but I think it's just michigan.gov/maps, EGLE maps and data. I'll double check that, but I can share that out in the chat as well.
Okay.
Because we do get that question a lot. Is like, can I use this data for myself? Yeah, we want you to. So please do.
One thing is we can show that we didn't show, it's likely to be a popular tool is our reporting widget. And so for instance, let's say you're working on a project, say in the Lansing area, to zoom into Lansing, and you have a site. Here's the reporting widget. So this allows you to create a kind of a canned report. So you can type in an address. You can place a point. You can bring in your own polygon layer, and then what it'll do is it'll create a canned report. So here's an example of one of those canned reports. So this is a 2-mile buffer around this address, 525 West Elgin Street. So it's showing the overall score. It's showing that there's 19 census tracts within that buffer distance. It's showing the overall score, the 2 sub-scores, also some more demographic information. But then you dive deeper, it shows each one of the categories and the indicator for each one of those census tracts. So this will probably be pretty useful for folks for they need a document. I'm working on a project. Here's kind of a canned report on that address or an area.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, John. I know we've been using that in some of our work too, which is kind of cool to actually have a Michigan focused screening tool to do that instead of having to use EPA's EGLE all the time. There was a question in the chat about, are there political details that are included in here at all? And I didn't know the answer to that. So I don't know if you can.
Don't we, in the context layers, do we have like the districts as a geographic layer, John?
Yeah,
I'm pretty sure we do.
We've got the state senate districts here. Maybe to make it a little more clear, let me go back to the overall score. Let me turn that off. Let's look at the environmental condition sub-score. We can change the transparency. Let's make this a little more transparent so you can actually see beyond it. So here's the state senate districts. That's Kevin Daly. We also got the state house districts. And also the US congressional districts. We've also got federal lands, state lands, many other geographic layers, just again, to put stuff into context.
Yeah, thanks for showing that. I didn't remember, but once you started showing it, I was like, oh yeah, that's right. I think he did bring that up at one of the other sessions, but just really briefly. So I didn't realize there was that many different ones on there. Was there anything else that you wanted to show folks? We don't have any questions or comments right now. So we'll just, there's anything else that you wanted to highlight, we can take a moment to do that and see if people are typing stuff in or thinking about raising their hand. I don't want to cut anybody off too early, but it is getting towards 2. We're going to be open till, we have time until 2:30, but if folks are ready to be done, we can be done early too. So, but John, I didn't know if there was anything else you wanted to kind of highlight.
Yeah, maybe we can show some of the data behind the data. So for instance, if we go back to our main EJ layer list, let's turn on proximity cleanup sites. Let's zoom into, again, Southeast Lower Michigan. And so this proximity cleanup sites, this is based on 3 data sets that EGLE manages, also along with EPA. That's the Part 201 cleanup sites, around 16,000 or so, leaking underground storage tank sites, and also the Superfund sites. So this proximity cleanup sites layer, it's based on these proximity to all these potential contamination sites. And so you can see they have an asterisk behind them to indicate that. We also have landfill sites. We've got hazardous waste sites, treatment and storage disposal facility sites, TRI sites. So again, just allow people to put data in context of what the overall score is or what some of the sub-scores are.
So Katie, I don't know if you and Regina want to handle this question, but the question was if we could talk a little bit more about how we intend to use the tool here at EGLE, and if we've heard about anything else about how others might be planning to use the tool. I think that sort of information sharing is really valuable for folks.
I guess I'll start, and Katie, you can chime in. You referenced a couple times, Jennifer, there are already ways that we use the EJ screening tool that the EPA has to really, provide information in our processes at certain times. And I think we're really working to hear from folks as they take a look at the tool. Tell us how you'd like to see it used. Tell us how you might use it. In the earlier, we talked about some of the potential purposes, whether it is a community looking to better understand what they face, whether it is, a company or industrial, facility looking to learn more about the community where they're located or where they're considering locating. I think there are many different ways it could be used. And so we're still exploring that. We're still really looking at getting more feedback and recommendations. I think in this window of time where we have the tool out for public comment, that's exactly what we want to hear about, are those recommendations.
Yeah, and the only thing I'll add to that is, that's why we really wanted the ability to kind of drill down in the individual indicators as well, because, at EGLE, there's so many different programs and divisions in terms of the work that they're doing. It's not always related to like a regulatory program. It could be related to funding for recycling or stuff like that really the uses of the tool will be different depending on the project or what folks are looking at. And I think this kind of gets into one of the other questions that we got on this in terms of how electric utilities could use the tool when they're looking at location of a new building. This person mentioned that there might be a case where a certain location has a high EJ EJ score unrelated to air pollution versus an area that may have problems with air pollution, but a lower overall score. And that's exactly, you know, I mean, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's exactly why we wanted the ability to look at the individual indicators or the categories for whatever it may, you know, whatever makes the most sense in terms of the use for the project. For instance, if we, I know we have a diesel reduction grant program, you know, so in that case where we're looking, we may only want to look at areas that have, you know, high traffic density or diesel particulate matter. So it gives you the ability to really utilize which indicators you want, or which categories or subscores, or looking at the overall score.
Yeah, and I was just going to add in, based on, you know, how does EGLE intend to use this? And I know I will give just a specific example, because it's really a straightforward one, where we're using currently EPA's EJ screening tool, but once this tool is finalized, we'll definitely be using this one instead. And that is when we're determining whether or not we need to do translation for certain permitting actions through air quality division. So EGLE has a limited English proficiency plan, which has some, you know, limitations in it and things that you need to look for. And so the tool, this kind of tool and that report option that John showed earlier, is really super valuable for us to show, like, okay, yes, we do need to do translation. These are the suggested languages. These are the things that might be helpful when we're doing outreach and trying to communicate with certain communities. So that's a way that we're using it as we get ready to go out for public comment for some of our air permitting actions. So I just wanted to mention that, like, as a concrete example. So this is a good question for you, John, too. The question was, is there a way to use the side-by-side function to show changes or trends over time? So I thought there isn't, but I'm not positive about that.
Yeah. I think it might be a little difficult in that, you know, all these data sets are kind of a snapshot in time. And so, you know, as we gather the data, more data, as state gathers more data, you know, maybe we'll be able to show that, but they may be difficult using this existing app. There are ways to do animation. So if we find out that a given layer, a given indicator is actually getting better over time, maybe an animation may be a better way to show that, or maybe we can show like percent change. That might be difficult to do with this current app.
Well, and that's interesting that you said that, because I was thinking back to one of our previous conversations where we were talking about how often this data is going to be updated. And so maybe that is something that we could consider in the future as we make these changes. So I don't know is that something that would be doable? And you might not know the answer to that. So I apologize for throwing that at you, John.
Well, we do have the absolute scores for each of the indicators. So, you know, we're envisioning updating this tool probably every 3 to 4 years. So using that absolute data, there may be a way to look at the changes over time at the, you know, individual indicator level. But again, as John mentioned, you know, each of these indicators is based on, you know, a set of data for a particular year, and not all of the data. We use the most current data that was available, so not all of the data is like from one particular year. So it would be difficult to kind of compare all of the indicators together across time, since the indicators do differ in terms of the time frame that they're representing.
That's a good point for sure. So this question might be in your wheelhouse, John. So the question was, is there data in the tool that accounts for pipelines and oil and gas transfer refinery locations specifically?
There isn't. You know, some of those sites may be 201 sites. So for instance, if we go to the 201 environmental cleanup sites, so you know, one could either from this app, we could potentially add a filter to filter by certain, industries. But also, I think this data is also available in our environmental mapper app. I think you can filter by industry there. But I think there's like 25 or 26,000 points here. So it'd be difficult to, click on each one to try to find out those type of industries. But we don't have that as a context layer. Although, potentially some of those sites are these 201 sites, or potentially, they are some of these Superfund sites.
Well, you mentioned the environmental mapper. Is there a layer in environmental mapper that has that data that could be pulled out somehow? I mean, I don't know. I'm just.
Yeah. So what we could do is, we could add a kind of an ad hoc filter here.
Mm-hmm.
We could add at the bottom just kind of a generic filter where you could choose any layer and then filter based on any attribute. And I'm assuming in that part 201 layer, it has an attribute on the type of site it is. I don't recall exactly if it has that. Let's click on one of these sites here. So at least in the data that we've compiled, it doesn't have a type of site, but I'm pretty sure in the raw data, there is a site type or facility type that we could add as kind of an ad hoc filter.
Okay, yeah, thanks. So, I mean, that's a good comment. It's definitely something for us to consider. This is an interesting question. It says that you mentioned Justice 40 draft data as a context layer. How does the creation of the state-specific tool change or influence the use or the relevance of that less detailed, and this is their words, not mine, less detailed national screening tool? I don't know if Katie, you want to talk to that, or Regina.
So the one thing I would say, that the climate and economic justice screening tool is in draft form as well. And so I'm not sure when the comment period ends for that, but it provides, that is very much focused on the funding aspect of Justice 40 for federal agencies. So it's a different type of tool, but the overlay it could be helpful as we move forward in terms of correlating information, but it's really a different tool created for a different purpose. But that the inclusion of it as a context layer is really for us to look at, how it pretty much, to use a non-technical term, jives with what we have in our tool. And so I am anticipating that there will be maybe some similar uses, but is yet another tool that can be used as we work to really identify ways to support environmental justice communities, or communities that are vulnerable, or communities that may be impacted by certain things. So there is no direct comparison, because that tool's, I think, very different than ours, and ours is much more Michigan specific. So hopefully that answers your question. I just feel like it is yet another tool in the toolbox, but focused very differently than our Michigan EGLE tool.
Yeah, the main difference between the two federal tools, which is now this CGES that's in beta form, and EPA's EGLE, is they don't look cumulatively at all of the indicators that they're addressing. So EPA's EGLE has EJ indexes where they take each environmental indicator and combine it with low-income population and people of color populations to create an index, and they have probably, I think, like 12 to 14 indexes. The CGES tool has, I think, 21 thresholds, so they're kind of an if-and statement in terms of looking at very specific indicators, but they don't combine to produce a cumulative score. So they are different in that way. And I will too mention that we included all the indicators that are, all the demographic environmental indicators that are included in EPA's EGLE to provide some consistency there. And then, as you can see, John has that context layer up for the CGES data, which looks a little bit different than the beta version because they don't even combine like how many thresholds are exceeded in an area. So if one threshold is exceeded, then that census tract is deemed a disadvantaged community.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I do really like how Regina said, does it jive with what we're doing? So I think giving those comparisons and being able to look at that is going to be useful, which is a good reason to include it. John, this question is for you about the report. So I know you showed one, and the question specifically was, does the report feature provide a PDF format? So yes, it does, but I know it does maybe some other formats too. So I didn't know if you wanted to just talk through those really quickly.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure the default format is a PDF. Let's do it, just a quick run through here. Let's type go to Perry, Michigan. Zoom into Perry. Let's do a 1.5 mile buffer. So there's only one census tract in Perry, which I guess shouldn't be surprised. If we click on the print function, so the only option is to a PDF.
Okay, so it doesn't give you another option to download it as like a CVS or CSV, I said that wrong, file or anything like that.
Looks like you could potentially save it to other print options, either right to a printer or any print driver you've got loaded on your computer.
Okay,
The default is a PDF.
perfect. All right. So we don't have questions or comments right now in the chat box. Want to give you guys just plenty of time to raise your hand if you want to do that, or if anybody's typing in stuff. So John, you're still sharing your screen, just so that you know.
Okay.
If you want to stop sharing, you can. It's up to you. Otherwise, maybe we'll give you guys a few minutes back for your afternoon. Definitely, we will be having another session tonight starting at 6 o'clock, so 6 to 7:30. So if you're interested and you just haven't gotten enough of MiEJScreen today, then join us again. The more the merrier, really. You guys have been asking some great questions, and we did get another comment. I'm just going to read it out loud so everyone can hear the comment. But we'll go over a little bit in just a second about how you can continue to make comments if you'd like to do that. And then, like Katie said, we do have that one other office hour coming up next week. So this is just a comment for the record. It says, I would also like to see large scale CAFO anaerobic digester projects. CAFO is partners with public utilities or private energy companies for commercial RNG manure-based biomethane production. The EJ ramifications of the push for manure biogas could be very significant, especially if it incentivizes CAFO expansions and new construction. So thank you very much for that. All right, so John, this one is for you, and this was earlier in the presentation, you were talking about different file types or file options for downloading. So maybe you could talk a little bit back. You could go back to that menu and talk a little bit about that data downloading option. I think that was an important thing too.
It wasn't so much downloading, it was how to add your own data.
Yep.
Actually, I was reading up an example. A couple of comments we heard about potential for flooding. And so give an example. This is called a map service or a feature service, and only GIS geeks would understand this. But this is the URL for this national flood hazard layer. So I'm just going to grab this. I'm going to copy it. So on the add layer option, sorry, my computer's running really slow right now. Here it is. So if you have your own local file, you can bring in a shape file. It's got to be zipped up, a CSV. Say, for instance, you had a Excel spreadsheet or a CSV of latitude, longitudes of CAFOs or a site you're working on or your facility. You can add it here. A KML file, which is a standard Google Earth format, GPX or GeoJSON. You can also add a map service or feature service. So I showed you that the flood hazard layer. So I'm just going to paste it in here. Let's zoom into, say, Clinton County here. So this is the national flood hazard layer, added as your own external layer. You can see these are mostly large, wide floodplains, but again, there's another example. You can add your own external data.
Yep, I think that was where they were talking about how you could do that. And then I just reiterated that, you know, all of that information in the maps and data layers that we have for our EGLE on our EGLE site, you can download that too into a CSV format and other formats, which is pretty cool. All right. You guys can tell that I'm dilly-dallying because I don't want to cut anybody off. But I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and just kind of go over a couple of those other things here before we let folks go or we lose all of you today. So again, let's just kind of talk through the, these are our people, which you guys already met everybody, but I wanted to just remind folks of how you can make a comment. So you can definitely mail us in comments. We take handwritten things on napkins, on Post-it notes, anything that you want in that regard. You can definitely send emails to us at eagle-environmentaljustice@michigan.gov. One of the best ways potentially for some people is to just leave us a voicemail. So just give us a call at 517-284-1400 and let us know what you think about things, good or bad. We take all comments. So appreciate the good ones, but we'll take the comment, you know, suggestions for improvements as well. And then this afternoon or this evening, again, we're going to be having that further session from 6 to 7:30. And then, you know, like I said, you could give us a call or pop us an email if you have questions outside of the MiEJScreening tool, or you can't remember, you know, how to find some of the things that we chatted about today. So again, that email address is eagle-environmentaljustice@michigan.gov, or you can give a call at 517-249-0906. So that's really what we've got for you this afternoon. Of course, we want to thank you for joining us. Appreciate the time, energy, and effort you've all been listening and participating and poking around in the tool. All of this participation is just going to make things better for sure. So we are recording this session as well, like I mentioned earlier, and it will be posted on EGLE's YouTube channel as well as on the Environmental Justice website for you guys to view if you'd like to. Those previous versions, recorded versions from March 29th are also already posted on there. So if you need to take a look back or want to see what other people were asking about or commenting on, you know, please feel free to do that as well. So Katie or Regina, do you guys have any last words that you want to put in? Otherwise, I think I'll let folks go for today.
Just reiterating your thank you. Please share with us your thoughts, ideas, comments. Really appreciate it. Thanks.
All right, folks. Well, maybe we'll see you this afternoon. And if not, I hope you have a really wonderful day.